The Alpha King believed the lies and threw his Omega into prison. The price he paid was devastating. What lies could be powerful enough to make an Alpha King imprison his own Omega? And what devastating price could possibly follow a decision like that? If you enjoy emotional werewolf stories filled with loyalty, betrayal, and unforgettable twists, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Tell us in the comments. If you were the Alpha King, would you trust the evidence or trust your Omega? Now, let the gates of the kingdom open as a single decision begins a journey that no one can take back. The cruelest prison is built the moment trust is replaced by fear. The first rays of dawn had barely touched the silver towers of Mooncrest Citadel when the royal judgment bell echoed across the kingdom, its deep voice rolling over rooftops, marketplaces, and quiet village roads until every citizen understood that something extraordinary was about to happen. Men, women, and children gathered inside the grand courtyard, whispering countless rumors while rows of royal guards lined the polished stone path leading toward the ancient judgment platform. Above them, the banners of the Alpha Kingdom fluttered beneath a pale autumn sky, their silver wolf crests shining in the morning light as though watching everything in silence. At the center of the platform stood Emily Carter, a young Omega dressed in a simple ivory gown beneath a charcoal gray cloak. Her wrists remained free, yet the heavy circle of guards surrounding her made freedom feel like a distant memory. She lifted her eyes toward the royal balcony where Alpha King Ryan Ashford stood before the gathered council. His black ceremonial cloak rested heavily across his shoulders, and the polished silver crown upon his head reflected the cold morning sun. From where Emily stood, he looked every bit the powerful ruler the kingdom admired, yet she also recognized the uncertainty hidden behind his composed expression. Only weeks earlier, they had spoken quietly beneath the palace gardens about hope, loyalty, and the future of the kingdom. Now an invisible wall of suspicion stood between them. Lord Damien Crowe stepped confidently onto the platform carrying a leather case sealed with the royal crest. One by one, he presented letters, maps, and sworn statements that appeared to prove Emily had secretly shared confidential palace information beyond the kingdom's borders. Every document looked authentic. Every witness repeated nearly identical testimony. Murmurs spread rapidly through the crowd until whispers turned into certainty. Faces that once greeted Emily with warm smiles now watched her with disappointment or quiet disbelief. Ryan listened to every report without interruption. As Alpha King, he had sworn that justice would never bow before emotion. Every piece of evidence placed before him demanded a decision he desperately wished he did not have to make. His fingers tightened against the carved wooden armrest of the throne while his thoughts searched for a reason to doubt the carefully prepared accusations. Yet nothing presented before the council appeared inconsistent. Emily remained silent throughout the proceedings. She did not beg. She did not accuse anyone in return. She simply looked toward Ryan with calm blue eyes carrying more sadness than fear. Deep inside, she understood that words spoken against carefully arranged evidence rarely changed a person's mind. Sometimes truth needed time before anyone was willing to recognize it. The silence stretched across the courtyard until Ryan slowly rose from his throne. Instantly, every voice disappeared. Even the autumn wind seemed to pause between the towering stone walls. Looking directly at Emily, Ryan spoke with the steady authority expected of a king, though each word felt heavier than the last. Until the investigation reached its final conclusion, Emily Carter would be imprisoned beneath Mooncrest Citadel under charges of suspected treason against the Alpha Kingdom. A quiet gasp swept through the crowd. Emily closed her eyes for only a heartbeat before opening them again. Without resistance, she removed the small silver pendant she had worn since childhood and gently placed it upon the stone platform before turning toward the enormous iron gates leading below the palace. The guards escorted her through the shadowed corridor without needing to touch her, for she walked willingly with quiet dignity that no accusation could erase. Ryan remained standing long after the heavy prison door echoed shut beneath the castle. Something deep inside him whispered that justice had been served according to the law, yet another quieter voice refused to celebrate. High above the palace towers, a lone white hawk circled once before disappearing beyond the distant mountains, while somewhere beneath the ancient stones of Mooncrest Citadel, the sound of a single prison door closing marked the beginning of a mistake that would one day change an entire kingdom. The prison beneath Mooncrest Citadel was colder than Emily Carter remembered from the few times she had delivered blankets there during harsh winters. Thick stone walls held the chill of countless seasons, while narrow windows high above allowed only thin ribbons of daylight to reach the worn stone floor. Yet the darkness never changed the quiet kindness that had always defined her. On her very first morning inside the cell, she noticed an elderly woman in the neighboring chamber struggling to stand after a restless night. Emily softly called to one of the guards and asked for nothing more than warm water and a few simple herbs growing beside the outer courtyard. The guard hesitated at first, remembering the charges against her, but something in her calm voice convinced him to listen. Before sunset, the elderly prisoner smiled for the first time in days. Word traveled quickly through the underground corridors. The imprisoned Omega never complained about her own circumstances. Instead, she comforted frightened newcomers, shared what little food she received with those who had even less, and quietly reminded everyone that hope could survive even behind iron doors. Some guards began greeting her respectfully during their rounds, not because they doubted the official verdict, but because compassion was difficult to ignore when witnessed every day. Above the prison, life inside the palace continued exactly as the royal council expected. Meetings filled the grand chambers from sunrise until evening. Messengers arrived, carrying reports from distant villages. Noble families attended formal banquets beneath glittering chandeliers. Yet despite the familiar routines, something subtle had changed. Ryan Ashford noticed it first during breakfast, when the royal kitchen served a meal missing the herbal tea Emily had always prepared whenever council sessions stretched late into the evening. Later that afternoon, the palace librarian quietly mentioned that several historical records Emily normally organized could no longer be located. The head gardener admitted that rare flowers blooming beside the western courtyard had begun to wither because no one remembered the precise care they required. They were all small details, insignificant on their own, yet together they created an absence that seemed to echo through every hallway of Mooncrest Citadel. Ryan tried to dismiss the feeling as guilt born from making a difficult decision, but each passing day only deepened the quiet emptiness surrounding him. During one council session, he instinctively turned toward the doorway, expecting to see Emily delivering updated records before realizing she was no longer there. The empty space unsettled him far more than he cared to admit. Meanwhile, Captain Lucas Harper continued overseeing routine palace security. While reviewing guard rotations near the lower prison, he noticed something unexpected. Several guards who regularly watched Emily requested additional assignments near her cell instead of transferring elsewhere, an unusual pattern inside the royal prison. Curious, Lucas asked one veteran guard why. The older man answered without hesitation. "She thanks every person who brings her meals, Captain. Yesterday, she asked about my grandson because she remembered he had been ill during the spring festival. I have guarded prisoners for 20 years. None have ever shown more concern for others than for themselves." Lucas remained silent after hearing those words. They did not erase the evidence presented during Emily's trial, but they did not fit the image of someone capable of betraying an entire kingdom either. Later that evening, while walking alone through the quiet palace corridors, Lucas paused. Beneath a stained glass window overlooking the moonlit courtyard, a single question settled into his thoughts with surprising weight. If Emily had truly planned to destroy the kingdom, why did every person who spent time near her leave believing more strongly in her kindness than before? Somewhere inside Mooncrest Citadel, a story no longer matched the woman living behind the prison walls, and for the first time since the iron door had closed behind her, doubt quietly entered the palace instead of remaining locked beneath it. Autumn slowly settled over Mooncrest Kingdom, painting the forests with shades of crimson and gold, while a quiet uneasiness spread through the villages beyond the castle walls. Emily Carter had disappeared from public life, yet stories about her kindness seemed to grow stronger with each passing day instead of fading into memory. An elderly merchant visiting the capital told palace servants how a young Omega had once spent an entire snowy evening helping him recover scattered supplies after his wagon overturned near the eastern road. A shepherd from the southern hills remembered the same woman walking several miles through heavy rain to return a lost child safely home before quietly leaving without waiting for gratitude. A blacksmith recalled that years earlier she had secretly paid for repairs to the tools of a struggling apprentice who could not afford new equipment. None of those stories sounded remarkable alone. Together, they formed a picture completely different from the one presented during her trial. Ryan Ashford began hearing these accounts in the most unexpected places. Stable hands spoke about Emily bringing fresh apples to aging horses no longer fit for royal service. Palace cooks remembered how she always thanked every servant by name before accepting even the simplest meal. Gardeners quietly admitted the Western Rose Garden existed only because Emily had convinced the palace to preserve it instead of replacing it with another stone courtyard. None of those memories resembled someone willing to betray the kingdom she had served with such quiet devotion. One afternoon, Ryan walked alone through the palace gardens hoping the cool autumn air would settle the growing conflict inside his thoughts. The pathways felt strangely empty. The roses that once bloomed brilliantly beside the marble fountain had begun losing their color. The elderly head gardener approached with respectful hesitation and apologized for their condition. Lady Emily always knew exactly when the roots needed extra care before the first frost, he explained softly. She noticed things the rest of us overlooked. Ryan gently touched one fading blossom without answering. For reasons he could not explain, the neglected flowers felt like a reflection of something much larger slowly fading inside the kingdom itself. Deep beneath the castle, Emily spent her evenings reading worn books left behind by previous prisoners and teaching a young girl housed nearby how to read simple words scratched into old pieces of parchment. The guards occasionally paused outside her cell simply to listen as laughter quietly echoed through corridors once known only for silence. Captain Lucas Harper witnessed one such evening during a routine inspection. He watched Emily patiently encouraging the frightened child to sound out each letter while never mentioning her own circumstances. As Lucas turned to leave, the oldest prison guard quietly stepped beside him. "Captain," he whispered, "I have seen guilty people fear punishment. I have seen innocent people curse their fate. I have never seen anyone carry hope the way she does." Those words remained with Lucas long after he returned to the palace. That same night, he opened the investigation records once more, not searching for proof of innocence or guilt, but simply reading every witness statement from beginning to end. Halfway through the thick collection of documents, something unexpected caught his attention. Two witnesses had described the exact same conversation using nearly identical wording, despite claiming the events happened in different locations several days apart. The similarity was subtle enough to escape notice during the original investigation, yet impossible to ignore once seen. Lucas slowly read both statements again before carefully placing ribbons between the pages. Somewhere, inside hundreds of carefully prepared documents, someone had repeated a lie so perfectly that only the smallest imperfection revealed it had been rehearsed, and for the first time since Emily entered the prison beneath Mooncrest Citadel, the foundation of the entire case began to crack. Captain Lucas Harper carried the investigation records into the palace archive before sunrise, determined to examine every page without interruption. Dust drifted through narrow beams of golden morning light as countless shelves filled with decades of royal documents surrounded him in complete silence. He carefully placed the witness statements side by side upon a massive oak table, comparing every line, every date, and every signature. The more patiently he read, the more unusual details emerged. Several testimonies repeated uncommon phrases almost word for word, despite supposedly coming from people who had never met. A travelogue listed one royal messenger arriving at Mooncrest Citadel before another official record claimed he had even departed from the neighboring province. Individually, each inconsistency appeared harmless. Together, they formed a pattern that no honest investigation should have produced. Lucas quietly requested access to older archive volumes normally ignored during recent inquiries. After hours of searching, he discovered the original registry used to track confidential royal seals. According to those untouched records, one of the seals stamped onto the documents condemning Emily Carter had already been locked inside the royal treasury on the very day it was supposedly used elsewhere. Lucas stared at the faded ink for several long moments before checking the registry again. The entry had been written months before Emily's arrest and carried the signature of a retired archivist known throughout the kingdom for meticulous accuracy. That single discovery transformed uncertainty into genuine suspicion. Above the archive, Ryan Ashford continued fulfilling every responsibility expected of an Alpha King, yet concentration escaped him more with each passing day. During council meetings, he found himself studying the faces of his advisors instead of the reports they presented. Every confident explanation now seemed incomplete. Every conclusion arrived too quickly. Even Lord Damien Crowe, whose calm authority had once inspired confidence, appeared unusually eager to assure everyone that Emily's imprisonment had protected the kingdom from unimaginable danger. Ryan listened politely, yet something about Damien's unwavering certainty now unsettled him in ways he could not explain. Later that afternoon, Ryan walked alone through the lower palace corridors where he unexpectedly encountered the elderly prison guard who had spent decades overseeing the castle cells. The old man respectfully bowed before quietly speaking. "Your Majesty, I know my duty is to guard prisoners, not question royal judgments. But I have watched Lady Emily every day since she arrived. She comforts frightened souls, thanks every guard by name, and prays each evening for the peace of this kingdom. I have seen many people behind those doors. Her heart does not resemble the accusations written against her." Ryan remained silent long after the guard departed. The words echoed through the corridor with uncomfortable honesty. That evening, Lucas finally requested a private audience inside the king's study. Without making accusations, he carefully placed the contradictory records across Ryan's desk and explained each inconsistency one by one. He described the repeated witness language, the impossible messenger timeline, and finally the forgotten registry proving the royal seal could not have been used when official documents claimed it had been. Ryan examined every page personally, comparing dates and signatures until the room fell completely silent except for the crackling fireplace. When he slowly leaned back in his chair, the certainty that had once justified Emily's imprisonment no longer existed. In its place remained only one painful realization. Someone had not merely manipulated evidence. Someone had patiently constructed an illusion convincing enough to deceive an entire kingdom, and Ryan himself had become the final piece needed to make that deception complete. Outside the palace windows, cold rain began falling across Mooncrest Citadel, washing over stone walls that suddenly seemed far older than before, while deep beneath those same walls, Emily quietly closed the book she had been reading to the young girl beside her cell, completely unaware that the first undeniable thread leading toward the truth had finally been placed into the hands of the very king who had once ordered her prison door to close. The morning after Captain Lucas Harper shared his discoveries, Mooncrest Citadel felt quieter than it had in years. Even the bustling corridors seemed unusually restrained, as though the ancient castle itself sensed that something hidden beneath its stone foundations had begun to rise toward the light. Ryan Ashford dismissed the day's formal audience and remained inside his private study with every questionable document spread across the long walnut table. For hours he compared signatures, messenger records, travelogues, and royal seal registries, refusing to rely upon anyone else's conclusions. The more carefully he examined each page, the more impossible the original investigation became to defend. Every answer uncovered another contradiction. Every contradiction pointed toward careful planning rather than accidental error. By midday, Ryan quietly summoned Lucas once more. No council members were invited. No advisors were informed. Behind closed doors, the Alpha King issued a single order. Every official who had handled Emily Carter's investigation would be discreetly reviewed, beginning not with accusations, but with complete transparency of every record connected to the case. Lucas accepted the assignment without hesitation, understanding that the smallest careless move could alert whoever had orchestrated the deception. Together, they visited departments throughout the palace under the ordinary appearance of conducting seasonal administrative inspections. Clerks willingly produced archived ledgers. Messengers opened delivery journals. Treasury officials unlocked secure registries documenting every royal seal issued during the previous year. Most records aligned exactly as expected. A few did not. Late that afternoon, inside a forgotten storage room beneath the Eastern Archive, Lucas discovered an overlooked ledger containing inventory requests submitted by Lord Damien Crow's administrative office. Among otherwise routine requests appeared an unusual entry authorizing temporary access to duplicate wax molds used for ceremonial royal seals several weeks before Emily's arrest. The request carried Damien's own authorization mark. Alone, the record explained nothing. Combined with the altered seal registry and impossible messenger timeline, it completed another section of the growing puzzle. Ryan quietly studied the faded page before slowly closing the ledger. His expression revealed neither anger nor relief, only disappointment. He had trusted Damien's judgment for many years, believing experience naturally produced wisdom. Now that certainty had begun slipping away. Meanwhile, beneath the palace, Emily continued living each day with quiet purpose. She organized worn books left inside the prison library, encouraged frightened prisoners to write letters to their families, and gently reminded a discouraged young guard preparing for his entrance examinations that patience often mattered more than talent. The prison no longer felt defined by stone walls alone. Wherever Emily walked, small acts of kindness softened places built only to contain regret. One evening, the elderly prison warden paused outside her cell before asking the question that had remained inside his heart for weeks. "Lady Emily," he said softly, "after everything that has happened, do you still believe this kingdom is worth loving?" Emily looked toward the narrow window where the last rays of sunset painted the sky with quiet shades of gold and rose. A gentle smile appeared across her face. "A kingdom is more than the mistakes made within it," she answered. "As long as there are people willing to choose what is right after discovering they were wrong, hope still has a home here." The old warden lowered his head, deeply moved by words he knew he would never forget. At nearly that same moment, Ryan stood alone on the highest palace balcony, watching evening settle across Mooncrest Kingdom. Far beyond the distant forests and villages, the first stars appeared above the mountains. For the first time since ordering Emily's imprisonment, he no longer asked whether she had betrayed the kingdom. Instead, one far more painful question refused to leave him. If she had been innocent all along, then the greatest betrayal had not come from the Omega behind the prison walls. It had come from the lies he himself had chosen to believe. Long after the palace lamps had been extinguished, Ryan Ashford descended the winding stone staircase leading toward the ancient prison beneath Mooncrest Citadel. He wore no royal cloak, no ceremonial crown, and brought no attendants with him. Only Captain Lucas Harper walked a respectful distance behind before quietly stopping at the final iron gate. Ryan wished to continue alone. The prison corridor stretched ahead in complete silence, broken only by the distant sound of dripping water and the gentle flutter of candlelight against weathered stone. As he approached Emily Carter's cell, he slowed almost instinctively. Through the narrow iron bars, he saw her seated beside the small wooden table where she was patiently helping the frightened young girl from the neighboring chamber read another page from an old storybook. Every word she spoke carried warmth instead of bitterness. When the lesson ended, the child smiled with growing confidence before a nearby guard gently escorted her back to her own room. Only then did Emily notice Ryan standing quietly outside the doorway. Surprise crossed her face for only a brief moment before settling into the same calm expression she had carried since the day she entered the prison. Neither of them spoke immediately. The silence between them felt heavier than any accusation ever had. Ryan finally stepped closer to the iron door, his voice quieter than it had ever been inside the council chamber. "I came because I needed to see you with my own eyes, away from reports, witnesses, and council debates." Emily simply nodded, waiting patiently. Ryan looked around the simple room. A neatly folded blanket rested upon the narrow bed. Several worn books were carefully arranged on a small shelf built by one of the guards. Fresh wildflowers stood inside a clay cup near the tiny window, placed there by grateful prisoners after Emily had comforted them through difficult days. Nothing inside the cell reflected resentment. Everything reflected quiet dignity. "I have been reading the investigation again," Ryan admitted. "Every page raises more questions than answers." Emily lowered her eyes for a moment before speaking softly. "Sometimes the truth is difficult to recognize because lies are arranged to look complete." Ryan felt those words settle deeply inside him. He had spent weeks believing certainty came from evidence alone. Now, he understood that evidence, without honest examination, could become its own kind of deception. "Are you angry with me?" he asked at last. Emily remained silent for several heartbeats while gentle evening light filtered through the small window above. "I was hurt," she answered honestly. "But anger becomes another prison if we choose to live inside it." Ryan could not look away. The woman he had condemned still possessed more peace than he himself had found while sitting upon the throne. He realized the greatest punishment had never been Emily's imprisonment. It had been the slow loss of trust inside his own heart each day since ordering those prison gates to close. Before leaving, Ryan quietly placed a small leather-bound journal upon the wooden table. "This belonged to my mother," he explained. "She once wrote that every ruler must learn the difference between judging quickly and judging wisely." I did not understand those words until now. Emily gently touched the worn cover without opening it. She thanked him with the same quiet grace she offered everyone else. As Ryan turned to leave, the elderly prison warden watched from the end of the corridor. He had witnessed countless meetings between rulers and prisoners throughout his lifetime, yet never one where the king departed carrying a heavier burden than the person locked behind the door. Outside, Captain Lucas waited with new reports gathered from the continuing investigation. As Ryan accepted the sealed folder, Lucas spoke only one sentence. "Your Majesty, we have finally found where the false evidence began." Ryan looked back once toward the silent prison corridor before following Lucas into the darkness above, knowing that the next truth they uncovered would determine not only Emily's future, but the future of the entire kingdom. Morning sunlight poured through the towering stained glass windows of the Grand Council Hall as every elder, royal advisor, military commander, and provincial representative gathered beneath the vaulted stone ceiling. News of the reopened investigation had spread across Mooncrest Kingdom with astonishing speed, leaving the chamber filled not with confident conversation, but with quiet anticipation. Ryan Ashford entered without ceremony and took his place before the ancient throne rather than upon it, choosing to stand beside the long council table where every recovered document had been carefully arranged. Captain Lucas Harper stepped forward carrying several leather folders tied with silver ribbons, each containing weeks of patient investigation. No accusations were spoken at first. Lucas simply invited the royal archivists, treasury clerks, and messenger captains to verify every record in full view of the council. One by one they confirmed the inconsistencies. Official seals had been duplicated without proper authorization. Delivery logs contained impossible timelines. Witness statements repeated identical phrases despite supposedly being written independently. The original patrol registry contradicted the route presented during Emily Carter's hearing. Every confirmation quietly removed another stone from the foundation upon which the entire case had been built. Lord Damien Crowe maintained his composed expression while listening carefully to each report. When invited to respond, he calmly suggested that administrative errors naturally occurred within a kingdom managing thousands of documents every season. His explanation sounded measured and reasonable until Lucas produced one final ledger recovered from an overlooked archive beneath the eastern wing of the palace. The faded pages recorded temporary access to ceremonial wax molds used for royal seals. The authorization carried Damien's own signature, dated several weeks before the forged evidence first appeared. The elderly master archivist slowly compared the signature against preserved treasury records before respectfully lifting his head. "The registry is authentic," he announced. "It has not been altered." Silence settled across the chamber. Ryan carefully unfolded another document, this one containing the original statement of the royal messenger responsible for delivering the inspection orders that had ultimately led to Emily's arrest. During the first investigation, only a copied version had been submitted. The original clearly stated that the sealed instructions had been handed directly to him by Lord Damien Crowe rather than through the Royal Records Office, as official procedure required. Several council elders exchanged uneasy glances. What had once appeared to be isolated irregularities had now become a clear pattern no longer explainable by coincidence. Ryan slowly looked toward Damien, disappointment outweighing anger within his expression. "You asked this kingdom to trust evidence that you helped create," he said quietly. Damien opened his mouth as though searching for another explanation, yet none came. The weight of verified records now spoke more convincingly than words ever could. Ryan turned toward the assembled council and raised his voice just enough for every corner of the Great Hall to hear. Effective immediately, every charge against Emily Carter is suspended pending final restoration of her honor. The investigation concludes that the evidence used to imprison her cannot be trusted. No celebration followed. The chamber remained still as the meaning of those words settled over everyone present. Many lowered their heads, remembering the day they had watched an innocent Omega walk through the prison gates without defending herself. Ryan continued with quiet determination. Justice does not become justice simply because it follows procedure. It must also follow truth. Outside the palace, the great bronze bell sounded across Mooncrest Kingdom, echoing over rooftops, gardens, and distant villages. Deep beneath the castle, Emily paused while arranging books upon the small wooden shelf inside her cell. She looked toward the narrow window as the familiar sound reached even the oldest prison corridor. She did not yet know why the bell had rung, but something inside her heart gently whispered that the long season of silence was finally beginning to end. The following morning, the gates beneath Mooncrest Citadel opened for the first time since Emily Carter had walked through them in silence. The elderly prison warden unlocked the heavy iron door with steady hands, then stepped aside instead of speaking. Emily looked at him with quiet gratitude before gathering the few belongings she had accumulated during her time below the castle. The worn storybook she had shared with the young girl remained on the small table, along with the clay cup that still held fresh wildflowers placed there by grateful prisoners. Before leaving, Emily gently handed the book to the child waiting nearby and encouraged her to keep reading every day, reminding her that knowledge could open doors no prison ever could. The young girl smiled through grateful tears while several guards respectfully lowered their heads as Emily walked past. None of them saw a prisoner leaving the dungeon. They saw a woman whose kindness had transformed even the darkest corner of the castle. Above ground, the grand courtyard had filled once again with citizens from every corner of the kingdom. The same stone platform where Emily had once been condemned now stood beneath bright autumn sunlight, surrounded not by whispers of suspicion, but by quiet anticipation. Ryan Ashford stood before the gathered crowd without his ceremonial crown, wearing only the simple black cloak of the Alpha King. Captain Lucas Harper remained beside the council table where every corrected record had been displayed for public review. When Emily entered the courtyard, complete silence settled over thousands of people. Many recognized her immediately. Others lowered their eyes, remembering the day they had watched her disappear behind the prison gates without questioning whether the accusations had truly matched the woman they had known. Ryan slowly stepped down from the platform until he stood only a few feet away from Emily. For several heartbeats, neither of them spoke. Then, before the royal council, the palace staff, the village elders, and every citizen gathered inside Mooncrest Citadel, the Alpha King lowered himself onto one knee. A wave of astonishment swept through the courtyard. No king in living memory had ever offered such a gesture to someone he had once condemned. Ryan raised his eyes to meet Emily's calm gaze and spoke with complete sincerity. "Emily Carter, I believed evidence, without seeking the whole truth. I allowed carefully crafted lies to become my judgment, and because of my decision, an innocent woman lost her freedom. Before this kingdom and before you, I accept full responsibility for that failure. I ask neither for immediate forgiveness, nor for forgotten memories. I ask only for the chance to become the kind of king who never repeats such a mistake." His words carried across the courtyard with remarkable clarity. No one applauded. No one interrupted. The silence itself honored the weight of what had been confessed. Emily looked at Ryan for a long moment before quietly offering her hand. "A sincere apology cannot erase yesterday," she said gently, "but it can become the first honest step toward tomorrow." Ryan accepted her hand and slowly rose. He immediately turned toward the gathered citizens and announced a series of reforms requiring independent review of every future investigation, multiple verification of royal evidence, and public accountability whenever judgments affected the lives of ordinary people. The council unanimously accepted the reforms without objection. As warm sunlight spread across the ancient stone walls, the bronze bell echoed once more through Mooncrest Kingdom. This time its sound carried neither accusation nor uncertainty. It carried the promise that truth, though delayed, had finally reclaimed its rightful place, while Emily stood once again beneath the open sky, not because power had rescued her, but because integrity had never abandoned her. Several weeks passed, and with each sunrise Mooncrest Kingdom felt a little different from the one Emily Carter had left behind. The reforms announced by Ryan Ashford were no longer promises written on parchment. They became living changes carried into every village, courthouse, and council chamber throughout the realm. Independent scribes reviewed important investigations before judgments could be issued. Witness testimony required careful verification instead of hurried acceptance. Royal advisors no longer possessed unquestioned authority simply because of their titles. The kingdom slowly learned that justice became stronger when humility stood beside power. Emily never asked for a position at court, nor did she seek recognition for the suffering she had endured. Instead, she quietly returned to the Western Gardens where she had once spent peaceful mornings caring for flowers forgotten by everyone else. Palace servants smiled as they watched color slowly return to the rose beds that had struggled through the long season of uncertainty. The elderly gardener welcomed her with grateful eyes, admitting the gardens had never truly recovered until she returned. Emily simply smiled and began tending the soil, believing that healing often started with small acts repeated every day. Ryan visited the gardens often, not because duty required it, but because the quiet paths reminded him of the lessons he had nearly learned too late. Their conversations were never rushed. Sometimes they spoke about the kingdom. Sometimes they walked together beneath flowering trees without saying anything at all. Ryan understood that trust could never be demanded. It could only be earned through countless ordinary choices made with honesty. Emily saw that change within him. The proud ruler who once believed every official report had become a king willing to question even his own conclusions before deciding another person's future. One bright spring morning, representatives from every province gathered inside the grand courtyard to witness the signing of the kingdom's Charter of Fair Judgment, a new law ensuring that no citizen would ever again lose freedom based upon unverified evidence alone. Rather than placing his own name first upon the document, Ryan invited the elderly archivist, Captain Lucas Harper, and finally Emily to stand beside him as witnesses to the promise. The gathered crowd watched in respectful silence before warm applause gradually filled the courtyard. It was not applause celebrating victory over another person. It honored the courage to admit mistakes and the wisdom to build something better from them. Later that evening, Ryan and Emily stood together upon the western terrace overlooking Mooncrest Kingdom. Beyond the castle walls, rivers reflected the golden colors of sunset, while distant villages prepared for another peaceful night. Ryan quietly broke the comfortable silence. "I once believed a king protected his kingdom by never appearing uncertain," he admitted. "Now I understand that asking difficult questions protects it far better than pretending to have every answer." Emily looked across the endless forests, stretching toward the horizon, and gently nodded. "Truth asks for patience," she said softly. "Kindness asks for courage. A kingdom needs both." The last rays of sunlight settled across the ancient stone towers as a gentle breeze carried the fragrance of blooming roses through the evening air. High above the palace, the same white hawk that had circled the castle on the day Emily entered the prison appeared once again, gliding peacefully across the clear blue sky before disappearing toward the distant mountains. This time no shadow followed its flight. The bronze bell echoed one final time across Mooncrest Kingdom, not as a warning or a judgment, but as a quiet reminder that the greatest strength any ruler can possess is not the power to command others, but the wisdom to seek the truth, the humility to correct a mistake, and the courage to protect those who have always chosen kindness even when kindness was never returned.